Right, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for this Livestock Lecturers webinar hosted by AHDB. The purpose of this webinar, we've held college lecturers days for many years now, at least 10 years plus, but obviously with the situation we're in this year, we can't be holding a face-to-face conference. So we've taken the opportunity to split it into various different sessions. We obviously had the session this morning, and then we've got the livestock one now, arable tomorrow, and business tomorrow afternoon. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for some more of the webinars and not just this afternoon's. I'm Katie Thorley, and I work in the Beef and Lamb Knowledge Exchange team. And this afternoon we've got a range of topics for you. We've got Ben talking about SmartPork, Kathryn with talking about our GrassCheck project, and then Lorna on BVDFree. The plan of action is each of the speakers will present to you, and then we'll have time for questions after each speaker. So if anything does spring to mind while the presenters are going through their topics, please type in the question panel on the right hand side of your screen any questions so that you don't forget them, and then after each speaker I'll ask those questions to the various speakers. Hopefully there won't be any technical issues, but if there are, please bear with us. And you will all stay muted throughout the presentation, so it doesn't matter what's going on in the background wherever you are. That's not a problem. I've mentioned about the questions, or if you've got any technical issues, again, just type those into the question panel, and if one of us can help you, obviously we will. We aim to finish by 3:30, and the sessions are being recorded, so if there is anything you need to go back to and recap yourself on, then they will be available afterwards on the AHDB channel on YouTube. If you are a Twitter user, the hashtag and the @ is at the bottom of the screen, so feel free to tweet away and do whatever comments you want to do this afternoon. So without further delay, I will hand you over to Ben Williams, who is our Knowledge Transfer Senior Manager for our pork team, and he's going to talk you through SmartPork. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, ladies and gents. Yep, I'm going to take you through a new initiative from the pork team, SmartPork. I'll be honest with you, we've unashamedly stolen some of the concepts from the horticulture team, who've run a very similar project called Smart Hort. For those of you interested in multiple sectors, it's worth checking them out as well. Can I have the next slide, please? So unashamedly, SmartPork is the use of lean manufacturing techniques to improve efficiency. Obviously, I need to start with why lean manufacturing in particular, because there are more than one way to skin a cat. Next slide, please. Quite simply, we as an industry are not as productive as other sectors. I know that production might not be the major driver for many farmers. Lifestyle certainly is often cited as their main driver, but at the end of the day, you have to pay for a lifestyle. Lean manufacturing offers not only a how-to method to bring entire staff along with the management and the vision of a business, but it works. Unashamedly, lean manufacturing is proven in many other industries. Many of those are significantly more productive than agriculture. Lean particularly fits what agriculture does because we are overwhelmingly price takers. Producing a commodity product, we have to start with value. The price that we're going to be paid for that product is fixed, as in, even if we do start selling meat boxes and various other bits and pieces, there's only so much a consumer will pay for that product. And from that, in order to survive, there are two components that we need to build in. The first is the cost of production, and the second is this concept of economic rent. Both of those, when added together, need to equal the customer value. You can't suddenly create more than the value you're being paid for. And it's this concept of economic rent that's really important. In simple terms, we might call it profit. But in actual fact, it's a measure of the business's survivability in terms of volatile markets, in terms of the ability to innovate, to expand, to develop staff. And so it's more than just profit. What lean does is it builds the minimization of cost of production through reducing wastes with the maximizing of economic rent to meet that customer value. And it's starting with customer value that is key in lean manufacturing. We also know it works, and we know it works in agriculture. So the graph that you can see on the screen is from a pig producer who's been using lean manufacturing techniques to standardize their process for some years. The grey line is their performance in terms of farrowing rates by service group in the period of up to 2010, so prior to introducing lean techniques. And you'll see that the volatility is significant, but more importantly, it's below the targeted KPI of 90% or over that they wanted. The dotted line, the blue line, that is their performance in 2018 after successfully introducing lean manufacturing techniques, and you can see that the volatility is still there. You're never going to get rid of it, but it's significantly reduced, and more importantly, it's largely starting to exceed the KPI that's been set. More powerful still is what happened in 2019 when they were hit with a PRRS outbreak on that unit. The volatility did increase, as you'd expect, with increased production stresses, but importantly, because they'd standardized their procedures, they were following these lean manufacturing techniques, the volatility wasn't anywhere near the pre-lean processes, and more importantly, they still managed to perform at or above their KPI on the whole. In short, it's an incredibly powerful tool, and it works within agriculture. We also know, particularly in pigs, that if we take no action, we are losing money. So gilt retention is a big issue within pig production, in that we have a very significant turnover of pigs. That means that out of every 100 pigs that we have in a population, we tend to need about 34 replacements. That extra 34 pigs coming in has a significant cost to the industry, and it comes down largely to ineffective maintenance of our machinery. So the sow in pig production is that machine. It's the same as a robot in car production or an oven in bakeries. If we don't maintain that machine using not necessarily just lean principles, we're going to continue to hemorrhage that money. And a rough sort of cost for you is between 30 and 60 million pounds worth of lost revenue because of the high rate of turnover of production animals within the UK pig industry per annum. And that money is lost to production currently. So big numbers, big problems. How does SmartPork work? Well, in short, in the past, we've taken small trials, we've made small changes to production processes, and more often than not, when we look at the large KPIs of sow retention or pigs per sow per year, it's very difficult to measure progress because of that significant volatility you saw in the graphs before. Basically, the small progress, those incremental marginal gains, get lost within the noise of production. Instead, what's needed to see significant shifts is a process that allows you to build successive marginal gains over time into producing a big shift in production. In lean manufacturing, there's a process called total productive maintenance. It's the fundamental maintaining of your machinery to prevent breakdowns in the future and to maximize its output. What SmartPork aims to do is use total productive maintenance to increase the efficiency of our sows. It's a result of extensive work from previous programs. The Gilt Watch program was quite publicly discussed, the 8 Kilo Club less so. And what they've done is they've identified the significant total productive maintenance processes needed to support the sow. What we've done is we've done extensive literature reviews, extensive trials, and more importantly, we've checked with producers themselves and industry professionals to see whether or not the changes that they make to the maintenance of a sow are A, feasible, because we all have good ideas that are not realistic in practice, and more importantly, are likely to make proven seen differences within the production process. So we now have a bank of go-to tasks. These maintenance schedules, for want of a better phrase, are going to be implemented across 10 monitor farms in the UK. They'll embed a lean consultant. That lean consultant will follow through a mapping of the process and identifying of value within the production process itself with the farms. The farms will then, under the support of the KE teams and the lean specialists, they will identify the waste within that production system. They can then pull from the bank of known, proven, effective techniques to try and minimize that waste and embed them over the course of a year. The lean experts will help support the monitoring and tracking of that. The KE team will provide technical input, and at the end of it, importantly, those businesses will have been on a lean journey. The user journey will look very much like this. So we've just finished the recruiting of monitor farms. We were due to start this month, but with COVID, we've put that back into the new year. And basically there's two tracks, two user journeys. The unit manager themselves is going to undertake 6 days of lean training between February and May, and that's provided by a recognized training provider. The unit manager and the farm staff are going to map that production process, supported by the lean team. The unit manager and the farm staff will carry out the waste walks across specific stages of production. And that's really important because it's the staff that do the job within lean that know how to make the differences. And it's those staff that lean empowers to drive up production and performance. And if we go back to that graph I showed at the start, it's been suggested that the reason that UK agriculture isn't as productive is that we don't always engage those staff who do the job with making production changes. Once they've identified those wastes, and once they've identified those, over 9 months, they're going to pick 1, possibly 2 areas to really work on, supported by the KE team and the lean experts, and they're going to actually genuinely work to improve those. As they go through, they're going to present those findings to regional pig clubs, and on completion of the project, the unit manager receives an officially recognised lean qualification. Now that's important because the second user journey is that of the business owner. So they're not going into this alone or unprepared. The business owner is going to undertake a 2-day lean event, supported by ourselves and those lean experts, because it's a very lonely thing speaking a strange production language, particularly in the middle of a farm. The business owner is going to support with access to data and recording systems, as well as engaging in what we call Kaizen groups, those action groups that will make the changes on the farm. They'll also be part of the management group because we're not moving management from one person to another. There's no delegation of responsibility there. The business owner is going to support in some of those findings going out to the regional pig clubs, but importantly, the business owner is engaging this not just because they want to progress their own business performance, but it's a staff development tool. That recognised qualification helps support that staff member at the end. The lean provider themselves is a chap called Neil Fedden and his team at Fedden USP. They have been working in the pig industry for some time now, but they have previous experience across UK sectors and industries, including the horticulture sector. The Smart Hort programme has delivered a return on investment of 12 to 1, so savings of between 20 and 40% across those businesses, and between £400,000 and £600,000 in its first year alone. So lean definitely works, and it works in industries that most people have said it shouldn't. How can people get involved? Well, importantly, all of our monitor farms are going to be presenting at the local pig clubs, and at the moment that is still digital first, but as hopefully we move into sort of times returning to normal, that will be in person at the local pig clubs. Until then, we do have various online resources and we're in the press, so there is a website for this to find out significantly more information, not only about the SmartPork program specifically, but about lean management and its use and application in agriculture in general. We've got a webinar coming up on the 10th of November. And there is a recently released article for those of you who subscribe to Pig World. And ladies and gents, hopefully finishing on time, that takes us to the point where we're open to questions.
Thanks, Ben. That was very speedy go through. You're ahead of time. So has anyone got any questions? Please type them into the panel on the right hand side of your GoToWebinar panel. Looks like you've stunned them all to silence, Ben.
That doesn't surprise me. Lean management does stun many people to silence. It's one of our frequent issues. So one of the questions people often ask us is, we talk about management, we talk about efficiencies, but obviously there's 2 parts to this. So it's not just about managing process, it's about managing people. So AHDB also has the Agri Leader program, which is very much about people management. And we've included a lot of training around people management and behavioural change within the SmartPork program, and that's delivered through Agri Leader, which in its own right is a really worthwhile thing to sort of follow and have a look at the Facebook page of.
In the absence of any questions coming from the attendees, is there a good spread of the monitor farms that you're rolling this out over the country? And will there be opportunities for lecturers to possibly take students, obviously, when we're in a more normal world? Would that be a possibility?
So for us, yes, there is a good spread. I mean, as good a spread as there is pig production. So pig production is obviously heavily biased across the across Yorkshire, the east, and to a certain degree the south. And so that's where you'll find those pig farms, with a couple of exceptions, with a few in the Midlands. Pig farms being very, very high biosecurity. The way we've designed this is really the pig clubs will be the way to sort of get in touch with those monitor farms. So we'll bring the farmer to the people rather than the people to the farmer, and that's out and out a biosecurity concern at the moment. It's just taking large groups onto farms is very rarely feasible within the pig industry.
Okay, no worries. Questions are now coming in. So have the lean methods been used on beef or dairy production, or could it be used?
The short answer is yes on both counts. So without casting aspersions about any sector over the other, uptake it varies between the sectors. So dairy has quite a long history with lean, but I would say the uptake is limited. Beef and lamb, there are some really good progressive farmers out there looking and championing lean methods within beef and lamb. And I believe we're looking at having a case study in the new year for a beef and lamb enterprise. COVID unfortunately has delayed some of that. The short answer is lean works. It depends at which level you want to enter. Do you want to go out full out, sort of, develop this deep-seated lean culture, or do you want to take a toe in the water? My argument is there is something for everybody, but once you've committed, you have to commit at that level to see the work through. Too many people get sort of bogged down with the details too soon and they don't see it through. It's one of those that you really have to push, but it will work in any enterprise. I mean, from central government to healthcare to the automotive industry and God knows what in between, they use lean tools. And if we go back to that original graph, the food and beverage industry is overwhelmingly lean from the processing. So the moment you drop the animals in the lairage onwards, they are lean, and they are several magnitudes of order more productive than we are. And it is largely because of that.
Okay, thank you. How could we introduce the lean messages to the student audience?
So many years ago, I wrote a lot of resources under the ETF for lean in students, and it's simple processes. So everything from their practical coursework, in fact, actually, it's their practical elements that are best written into for lean. So everything from using lean techniques as some of their learning outcomes, some of their evidence for their portfolio work, all the way through to sort of just building in those basic elements of lean in some of that core teaching. So process mapping, when you want to give instructions of how to complete a practical task, well, deliver it as a process map. This is the value you want to achieve, completion of this task to this level. What are those process steps? All the way up to, in those business modules and enterprise modules, using tools like SmartPork, process maps, value stream mapping, all of those. There's lots and lots of tools available, and I know that the ETF certainly had some there. So very easily is the short answer. I'm sure if you email me some stuff over, I've got all sorts of bits and pieces, which if I change the name of a well-known college, I might be able to share. I don't think there was an embargo on it.
Okay, thank you. And how do KPIs fit into the lean initiative?
So I suppose there's two elements to this. So the first one is KPI. So for lean, we need to distinguish between what is a key performance indicator and what is just a metric that you measure. It's important to measure as much information as you possibly can, but you shouldn't get bogged down in measuring everything. There are really fundamentally 4 KPIs that you need to look at. One is around finance, because if you're not profitable, what's the point? One is around the health of your enterprise. So that could be mortality, that could be a measure of crop health. The other is around fertility, be that soil or herd fertility, and the final one is around yield. If you can't, from those 4 key performance indicators, look at the performance of your business, then you're doing something massively wrong. But they are essential. If you can't measure those 4 basic things, you can't do lean. So people need to be recording stuff, but it's about defining what is a key performance indicator, not just measuring stuff because either it makes you look good or because you can.
Okay. The next one, I'm just checking with one person whether what their question is. the next one is that there's an interesting point about people who work in business and there needs to be involved in this to drive up improvement. Is there also a problem with farmers being shy to share information about what they're doing to drive productivity with other farmers? Interesting to hear that there are pig groups where this can be done.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, it will depend on sector and region by region. So I mean, obviously I know pigs better than anything else. So if I stick with pigs, pigs is a highly integrated business, and there are 4 or 5 companies that probably control the vast majority of production. Do they talk openly all the time? Very definitely not. However, their suppliers, they will talk in those groups. But importantly, they're still keen to look at lean manufacturing. They're still keen to share amongst their production groups. So I think the pig industry, as much as we've got many closed doors or conversations happening behind closed doors, there is still a lot of sharing. And I still maintain, and I think they do if they're being honest, the best way to learn is to either steal it from somebody else who's doing it and is doing it well, or pinch with pride, I think is probably the better phrase. It's peer-to-peer learning. It still has a significant place. And with SmartPork in particular, it was that peer-to-peer learning that really delivered success. And again, we really are with SmartPork standing on the shoulders of giants, because Chaggers have done the same program in Ireland and they saw returns between 7-to-1 and 18-to-1, and it was that peer-to-peer element that was so supportive. So going through those pig clubs. So I don't know if that quite answered the question. Short answer is yeah.
Okay, the next one is saying that there's talk about along the lines of rewilding animals to get them back. It's quite a long one. Do you talk to such people to let them know about African swine fever and the risks it brings back to bring back wild boars in case they don't care about the farmed ones?
We do. So we have very long conversations. Our health and welfare team and our veterinary officer have very long conversations with not only those groups, so the NGOs, but equally with DEFRA, Environment Agency, AFA. We have very, very strong links with AFA, and we are obviously significantly more cautious than we are supportive of just introduction rewilding. I mean, it's an interesting one. If we go back to lean, I mean, you could mistake lean for just sort of being out and out about looking at profit. But actually what lean is about finding value and presenting a really good argument for how you get to that value. And there is value sometimes in certain activities. So value can work on the basis of profit, but can work on what we call the triple bottom line, Elkington's triple bottom line of profit, people, planet. I think AHDB is very much, or AHDB pork is very much along that order. We look at profit first, because without that we don't support the others. But actually we do need to assess the values of each of those, particularly I think in current climate. So the short answer again is yes, we work very, very closely, and we are very resistant to certain actions that jeopardize UK productivity. But equally, I do think that we need to look, particularly as we move to net zero, and this public services for public goods, we need to look at how we meet those values profitably.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. I don't think there's any more questions unless anybody types something in quickly. Then that is the end of the questions for your session, Ben. Thank you very much.
Thank you
for your insight into SmartPork. So next we have Kathryn Huson who is a research scientist, part of our project GrassCheck, which is at Kathryn works at AFB. So Kathryn's going to give you an insight into the GrassCheck project. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Kathryn.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for the introduction. Hello, everybody. So yeah, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of the GrassCheck project and some of the data that we've seen coming out of that today. Before I jump into talking too much about GrassCheckGB, I just want to kind of set the scene and give you a bit of background as to where this project originated. So as Katie said, I work at AFB, so I'm based in Hillsborough in Northern Ireland, and it was AFB in collaboration with sort of a couple of other organisations that first established the GrassCheck project back in 1998. So for that we have 20 years of continuous data here in Northern Ireland. It was originally set up as a grass growth and quality monitoring project with weekly plot monitoring at two core locations still at the moment. So the Agricultural College in Greenmount in County Antrim and the AHDB Research Farm in Hillsborough as well. And these plots are set up to replicate an intensive dairy grazing regime. So they're cut on a 21-day rotation through a March to October grazing season. And I think it used to be slightly higher, but now at the moment with MVZ rules coming in, they get 270 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. So from that long-running plot experiment, we have weekly herbage mass and quality measurements. We've also got a Met Office weather station on the Hillsborough farm, so we've got long-term weather records alongside that. Just trying to get my next slide, there we go. So with the long-term data that's come out of that project, over the last sort of 20 plus years, we've seen an average yield of 11.6 tonne off those plots, but you can see quite a range in year-to-year yields from this study. And with the sort of consistent protocols running across sort of the whole 20-year history, we found this a very valuable project for sort of informing policy in relation to sort of grassland agriculture in Northern Ireland. And sort of just the most recent example of that would be looking at 2018, where much of the rest of the UK, there was quite a significant summer drought. And GrassCheck data was used to sort of provide evidence for the early release of single farm payments so that farmers over here could purchase fodder to feed stock through that summer period. So since 2017, there's been quite a big development of the GrassCheck project. So from that original plot monitoring activity to develop a network, which now stands at 48 co-researcher farms spread across Northern Ireland, alongside the 2 plot sites. And sort of the value of adding that farm network has really enabled us to capture data across all of the province, and has highlighted some sort of quite significant regional differences in terms of grass productivity and typical grass growth curves. And it sort of really contributes some valuable data to KE outputs in terms of having real farm examples when we're talking about yield potentials and those kind of figures. So at the moment, as it stands, farm data and plot data go into a weekly bulletin that comes out through the grazing season. So we've got local growth and weather data in there, and local grass quality with the M+ and average daily gain estimates based on sort of some typical stock examples. And in Northern Ireland, we have a grass growth forecasting model that we run as well. So if we look at the GrassCheckGB project, it's a much newer project. Began in March 2019 and it's currently funded for 3 years. So the funding group, you can see the logos of everybody involved across the bottom of my slides now, but we're including research institutes, the Red Meat Levy boards, and of course AHDB Beef and Lamb, who've invited me to speak to you today, and a number of industry sponsors as well. So the GrassCheckGB network includes 50 farms, and these are spread sort of across the country, as you can see on the map. These farms were selected to make sure that we're incorporating a range of different production systems, different land types, and farms with sort of different grass growth potentials, as well as a different sort of management intensity as well. So we have everybody from quite intensive, high yielding lowland dairy farms through to very upland farms, grazing beef or sheep on the mountains, and several sort of organic systems included as well. The sort of project aims from GrassCheckGB, we're really looking to provide a detailed understanding of the grass growth potential across Great Britain, looking at sort of the actual variability in grass production utilisation on commercial farms, and using that data to try and identify what the key drivers are behind pushing better grass growth and better utilisation in GB. We're also hoping to validate the Northern Ireland grass growth prediction model to use in GB as well. That's something that's sort of ongoing at the moment. Obviously, there's sort of research aimed to this project, but a key aspect of it is knowledge exchange as well. So through the production of weekly grass growth updates and bulletins and publishing that grass growth and quality data, we're hoping to assist farmers with making grassland management decisions as they move through the season, and hoping to provide them with a little bit more data to support those decisions. So in order to sort of produce these outputs and collect data for both research and the KE activities, we are collecting an enormous amount of data through this project. All of the farms involved are taking weekly grass growth measurements across their grazing platform with rising plate meters. We're also able to collect data on stocking rates and grazing events, and from that we can calculate grass utilisation and any other data to do with reseeding, soil health and nutrient management on the farms, and that comes in through the AgriNet platform. All of the farms in the project submit grass quality samples as well, so the farms are sampling every 2 weeks, and they do that on an alternating basis, so we get weekly quality values coming in through the season, and they're all have automated weather stations fitted on farm. And these are sending data packets at 30-minute intervals, so we're getting an awful lot of detailed weather information coming in, so that we can really tie up that weather data with grass growth and animal data as well. So this is an illustration on the side of the slide here of one of the weekly bulletins for the GB project. If you haven't seen it before, you can find us on Twitter and on our website, GrassCheckGB.co.uk. So in terms of, sharing this information, the data coming down from the farms through AgriNet, we collate that along with weather and soil conditions from the on-farm weather stations and the latest grass quality results every week, and we put those into these bulletins. So we're publishing regional average grass growth rates, local weather data and soil conditions over the past 7 days as well, and the typical grass quality values that we're seeing coming in. And we're trying to tie those in with management notes depending on what's going on with the weather conditions, ground conditions, and whereabouts we are in the season, just to try and guide people as to things that they should hopefully be thinking about each week through the season. So you can find much more detailed information on the GrassCheckGB website. And on the website, we have live feeds to all of our GrassCheck weather stations. So you can see exactly what's going on your closest one. If you look on the map and then go to the weather tab and select the GrassCheck ID for the closest station, you can find up-to-date weather information for each of those farms. And we also have all of the recordings of webinars that have been done through this season, and any farmer focus or any other articles that have been published as part of the project are available on the website as well. So we're really trying to reach quite a broad KE output and a broad audience with this project. With the bulletins, as I said, they're published on Twitter. They're also published in the Farmers Guardian, which I think has a press circulation of around 29,000 on a weekly basis. Last time I checked, we've got just over 1,000 Twitter followers, and we set up a new Facebook page just last month, so we're just starting to build followers on that now as well. All of, obviously, and Ben said a few times in the last speak, anything that was planned for 2020 pretty much got cancelled with COVID in terms of on-farm events. We'd hoped to do some of those this season, but instead we've run a series of webinars, and they've been quite successful. So we've had an average of 117 people attending each broadcast, and almost 600 page visits as an average to listen back to those webinars, and those are still up available on the website now as well. GrassCheckGB data has contributed to other technical webinars with research staff and in other areas as well. And we've just started publishing a series of monthly farmer focus articles. So those are coming out in the Farmers Guardian and also onto our website. And through those, we're really trying to tell the story of some of our GrassCheckGB farmers and how they're using their grass data to really improve productivity and performance on farms, and just share their stories as to how they've improved their grassland management through the use of their data. So to take a little bit of a look at that data, I've got some figures from last year's grazing season just to show you. So through the 2019 season, overall, we recorded an average yield from the GrassCheck farms of 11 tonne of dry matter per hectare across the grazing platform. So that's not including any silage production on these farms, that's purely a grazing yield. Now, to put that into a little bit of context, many of you listening might well be aware, but it's estimated that sort of typical grassland productivity at the moment is sitting around sort of 7.5 to 8 tonne dry matter per hectare on dairy farms and sort of 4.5 to 5 tonne on typical beef and sheep farms. So really demonstrating through the GrassCheck network the kind of yields that are achievable using a rotational system and sort of with good grassland management. So within that 11 tonne average, there was a significant amount of variation sort of with total production between each of our farms, and that's quite reflective of the variation in the farms involved in the project. And that was, you know, we deliberately want to capture this kind of variation. That the absolute range was from 5.4 tonne to 16.7 tonne of dry matter last year. Farms were particularly impacted in terms of their yields on the weather they experienced through the season and also on the type of system they're running. So that yield of 5.4 tonne was from an organic farm in the south of England. So absolutely no nitrogen inputs and quite significantly affected by dry conditions in the middle of 2019, which really held back their grass growth rates through the summertime. But still achieving a higher than average yield through the system that they're using. And 16.7 tonne was a farm, one of the lowland dairy farms that's reasonably intensive in terms of its production, but sort of a very impressive overall yield. We're also looking at grass utilisation on our farms. So I want to give just a little bit of an introduction as to how this is all put together. For all of the GrassCheckGB farms, we calculated their average utilisation above a post-grazing residual of 1,500 kilograms dry matter per hectare. And on that basis, we got an average utilisation across all of the farms in 2019 of just under 80%. Now, there are some farms on this chart that are showing very high levels of utilisation, perhaps higher than you might expect, but we do have a number of farms within the project that we're actually routinely achieving sort of 1,400 and even below post-grazing residuals. So to put everybody on a level playing field, we set a target of 1,500 as a sort of typical figure that you'd be advising people to aim for, because we know that's good for grass regrowth. But some of those higher figures are just come with people pushing lower residuals. Quite a broad range in average utilisation, and I think I like this graph because it really shows as an overall average what kind of utilisation is achievable on a wide range of commercial systems in GB. But obviously utilisation targets do vary farm to farm, and they need to be set in consideration of sort of other targets on the farm and other sort of unique aspects of each system to decide what is an appropriate utilisation target for your farm, for your system and for your stock. Just as an example, for a high yielding dairy cows, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that when you start pushing those cows to lower post-grazing residuals, you're going to start impacting on performance. So you wouldn't expect those animals to be achieving post-grazing residuals of perhaps below 1,800, whereas beef and sheep guys are going to find it much easier to hit down to that 1,500 figure. Having a bit of a look at what we've seen from 2020. So we're right at the end of the data collection for this season, and I'm going to have some more individual farm figures coming out over the next couple of weeks as we start to have a better look at the data. But certainly 2020 has brought us some extreme conditions, starting off incredidly wet, sort of record-breaking wet weather in February, I think, and and then from the middle of March really becoming extremely dry through the spring and early summertime. And I think if I remember correctly, figures from the Met Office were giving 144% of typical sunshine for GB in spring and only 59% typical rainfall. And you can really see how that's impacted on the grass growth curve here for the first part of the grazing season. Grass growth rates with the dairy farms in green and the beef and sheep farms in yellow, and then an average value from 2019 in the background in blue. You can see that grass growth at the start of 2020 was significantly below where it was in 2019 with a much more favourable spring. But perhaps most significantly, you can see that in May and into the very start of June, that significant depression in grass growth rates when we'd be typically seeing peak productivity. And that's sort of really impacted on yields from this year, as I'll show you in a second. Thankfully, autumn has been a little bit more typical, but we haven't seen massive compensatory growth rates to really make up for that deficit earlier on in the spring and the start of the summer. So from the 2020 figures, we're looking at an overall average yield of 9.5 tonne. If we look at it on a sort of equivalent dates basis, we're looking at being 1.4 tonne down on yields from 2019 as an overall average there. And again, you can see on this chart quite a lot of variation on regional figures, just depending on sort of specific conditions and the weather conditions experienced within each region throughout the year. And to give you a bit of a better illustration is the data behind those bars for the regions. And these are the regional grass growth curves through the season, comparing growth in 2019 in the blue lines to growth in 2020. And you can see Wales, all of our farms in Wales, towards the end of the summer and the beginning of autumn, they really saw quite high grass growth rates compared to last season and compared to the other areas as well. And that's what's really driven them to having the highest overall regional yield for 2020 at 10.6 tonne. I'm not sure if I can go back. No. I'm not sure if AHDB can give me a hand going back a slide. And another one. Brilliant. Thank you. Not qualified in technical wizardry, as you can tell. Yep, so as well as recording the grass growth data from our farms, I've also said we've got the weather stations on site and we're looking at soil data as well. So all of the GrassCheck farms are fitted with a Davis Vantage Pro 2 station and an additional soil station. So they have temperature and moisture probes, and those are fitted at a 15 centimetre depth. So the bulletins that we publish through the season, we typically show soil temperature in the shoulders of the season when it's most relevant, and the soil moisture in the middle of the season. So the soil moisture values go on a scale from 0 to 200. And they're measuring soil moisture tension, so the availability of water in the soil for the plant roots to sort of take it up. And the higher that number is, the more resistance there is, and the drier the soil conditions are indicated to be. So a little bit counterintuitive, but higher readings of a drier number. So when we looked at the data from 2019, and we looked at the regional sort of mean grass growth rate compared to the soil moisture values, we saw that this sort of peaked around a reading of 60 centibars, and after that we saw, as soil conditions dried, grass growth rates did tend to decline. So that is very much in line with the manufacturer's recommendations that come with the soil probes to say that readings above 60 centibars, you do get the potential for restricted growth rates there. So when we compare the sort of soil readings that we've seen over the last 2 years, 2019 is shown on this graph here in the orange line, and we didn't really see extremely dry conditions across the country in 2019. There were some very dry conditions in the south of England through last summer, but in terms of an overall reading across the whole of GB, sort of peaked around about just under 80 centibars in the sort of springtime and into the summer again as well, but no significant nationwide soil moisture deficit was seen in that data. But when you compare the blue line, which is the soil moisture readings from our farms in 2020, and this is a weekly average again of all of the farm readings, we see a peak of 140 centibars at the end of May time. So that's really incredibly dry, and actually several of our farms had readings that were topping the scale at 200 for a period of weeks through this spring. And that really did drive grass growth rates down, and that peak on the soil moisture readings there really coincides with the depression that we saw in grass growth rates in the spring, as you can see highlighted on the smaller graph as well. Just to sort of show you how the soil moisture readings are tying in with the rainfall data, I said overall the Met Office are estimating about 59% of typical rainfall in spring this year. I've put together these figures on a monthly basis, so showing what GrassCheckGB farms have recorded in terms of rainfall and what the 30-year average Met Office figure would be for the whole of the UK for each of those months. I think April particularly, as an average across all of our farms, we saw 8.3 millimetres, which is very, very low compared to the typical average of just over 70 millimetres. And if you look at that on the graph here, we've got millimetres of rainfall over a week in the bars, and the black line shows sort of how that soil moisture reading rose as the soil moisture deficit developed through the season. So quite an interesting relationship between those two figures, and in some of the statistics that we've done, we've actually seen that so far with the limited data we've got, soil moisture seems to be much more significantly associated with grass growth rates than the rainfall figures themselves do. In terms of grass quality monitoring, we have seen higher grass quality figures across 2020 as an average than we did in 2019. Part of that could well be with a very sunny spring. We saw higher peaks in ME values this year than we did last year. So we had weekly averages of over 12 on a couple of occasions, just with the very high levels of sunlight allowing sugar to accumulate in the leaves and just pushing those ME values a little bit higher in the springtime. But the overall average for this year has been sat at 11.7. I think the overall range was 11.1 up to 12.2. So really highlighting that despite variabilities in dry matter figures and a little bit of variation in the ME, grass is a very valuable forage source throughout the grazing season, and something that, you know, hopefully people can be making better use of. We're obviously, this project's continuing for at least another 12 months, hopefully a little bit longer than that, and we're looking at continued data collection through that time, looking at trends in grass growth in relation to the weather data and other farm data that we're collecting through the project, and also working on that grass growth prediction model. We are hoping to run some key events next season, very much COVID dependent. But what we really want to do through this project is to try and share this data with the wider industry and really support the message of sort of measure to manage when it comes to grassland, because that really will help you to get the best out of your grazing platforms. And I think figures coming from DEFRA showed that only about 9% of GB farmers are currently measuring their grass on a regular basis with a plate meter. But it's interesting, the latest Farmer Focus issue that's come out, we've had one of our sheep farmers from Wales featured in that, and there's a quote from him and his views on taking part in the project, and he sees GrassCheck as being performance recorded grass for his performance recorded lambs. And I think that's a fantastic view of the project and a fantastic approach to it, and it's something that we very much hope would encourage a couple more people to maybe pick up a plate meter, try to get a handle on the numbers and try to get monitoring the grass growth to understand it a little bit better, keep an eye on their residuals and really try to make the most from that resource that they have. That, I think, is everything from me. happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Kathryn. We have already got a few questions come in, but if anybody else has got any questions for Kathryn, if you can type them into the question panel, that'd be great. So is there any long-term GrassCheck Northern Ireland data available for other researchers to use?
If there is a certain amount published online, the background data behind the grass growth curve is AHDB data, but if you want to use it for a research purpose or a teaching purpose, I'd say you can find contact details for us on the website, or I think is my email shared as part of this? If not, I can, it's kathryn.huson@afbni.gov.uk, so you can drop me a line and we can probably have a discussion about that on a one-to-one basis.
Okay, thank you. And another question from the same person. Will the Northern Ireland grass growth prediction model be published?
So the model was published, those predictions have been running for about 15 years now. The model was published back in 2005, and the original model was called GrassGrow, and it's published by Barrett et al. It's the model that we're using at the moment is very much based on that. There have been a few tweaks and a few changes, and I think as it's tidied up and upgraded over the next couple of months, we're hoping to publish another version, but that's sort of in the pipeline at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Another question, looking at the GrassCheckGB map, there doesn't seem to be a monitoring station in the east of England. Are there any plans to recruit farmers in that area?
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think part of the problem is there's not a huge density of sort of grazing based farms in that area, but we would certainly like to, it's not an area we've excluded deliberately, and actually unfortunately we are looking to replace one farm in the project this year, and it will be an AHDB funded farm. So if you know someone in that region that would like to take part, let us know. We've got an ad, we will be advertising recruitment in a couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you. So if you've got any ideas and that's your area of the country, then please let us know. And obviously we can guide them in the right direction of when it's advertised. Another question, what or have there been any improvement methods seen in the hills and upland grass since the recent trials?
So I think with the farms involved in this project, they're all already quite focused on doing a good job of their grassland management and really pushing their yields. I haven't analysed the data between the 2 years yet. I suspect we're not going to see anyone improving, particularly on last year's yields, because 2020 has been a much more challenging season. But I think certainly with upland farms pushing yields of over 10 tonne, it really does demonstrate what is possible when you manage a rotational system well, regardless of your topography and other limitations.
Okay, any data on grass growth quality on farms will largely rely on the grass species, and so have a lot of the species, are they generally ryegrass species, or is there more data on what species are on which farms?
Yeah, so most of the areas that are being measured as part of this project are predominantly perennial ryegrass pastures, with a certain amount of clover included on a number of those. We do have a couple of people that are measuring multi-species swards as well, but the grass quality analysis is being done through an IRS mostly at the moment, so it's not really optimized for the multi-species swards just yet. So the data is perennial ryegrass only, really, at the moment.
Okay, has anybody else got any other questions for Kathryn this afternoon? Oh, yeah, another one. Have you any data about the range of yield across the range of the 5 grass site classes, i.e. summer rainfall and clay percentage in the soil?
I haven't yet. I haven't got the farms broken down into those groupings. but it's certainly something we can look at.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kathryn. Thank you for giving us the insight into the GrassCheck project. And hopefully it's given everybody else a really good insight, and will encourage some of them to, if they haven't already gone to the website, to go to the website and monitor and check what's going on those different farms across the country, moving forward into next year for the, as you say, hopefully it'll be going for at least another year. So thank you very much, and
Thank you.
we'll move on to BVDFree and Lorna. So Lorna Gow is from AHDB. She's in the animal health and welfare team as a scientist, and she's going to give you an update on the BVDFree project this afternoon. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Lorna.
Thanks, Katie. So I'm just going to take you through where the scheme came from, why it's important, and how we're doing so far. So there we go. So in 2014, after deliberation from the Cattle Health and Welfare Group and following research around cost implications and animal welfare, the recommendation to industry was to create a scheme focused on BVD eradication. And in 2015, the BVDFree England board was formed. It comprised of an independent chair and a vice chair, as well as representatives from 6 industry partners, which were AHDB, BCVA, Holstein UK, LAA, MBA, and the NFU. Although only 6 sit on the board, there are over 100 other organisations and companies that have signed a statement of intent to support the eradication of BVD from England. So why eliminate BVD? BVD is an economically impactful disease that can have an impact on animal welfare and the environment. We also know the eradication is possible, as it's demonstrated by other international initiatives. And finally, we must coordinate with other national schemes within the UK. This is especially important, as once they get closer to eradication, England could hold them back from their ultimate goal. So as to our first point about economics and animal welfare, all of these symptoms can be caused by BVD, low conception rates, return to heat, abortion, having live persistently infected animals in herd, and then this can be summarized into the cost. For example, in the case of Bennett et al., they used spreadsheet models to assess the economic impact of non-notifiable diseases in farm animals in Great Britain. Estimates of direct cost to livestock production were made, and they separately identified the costs associated with disease output losses and those relating to disease treatment and prevention. And they estimated that BVD costs between 25 and 61 million pounds per year. That makes BVD one of the most financially significant endemic diseases in cattle. It's also important to note that that research didn't consider wider economic impacts, such as effects on markets, human health, and animal welfare, meaning the total could be higher. Further to this, Schmidt van de Limpert et al. Recently presented through case studies that the use of vaccination on herds with circulating BVD can reduce the effect on milk production significantly. It could therefore be assumed that a herd without circulating BVD could produce more milk. The links to all of these studies can be found in the information pack that's being sent to you in a couple of days. Another focus in research and public concern has been the effect endemic disease has on the environment, and in particular greenhouse gas emissions. In the example of Chatterton et al., they calculated that BVD in beef cattle could increase greenhouse gas emissions by 113%, based on 2.2 kilogram increase for every carcass over a baseline 17.1 kilogram in a healthy animal. This just further shows that less BVD in English herds could reduce the impact on the environment. And so on to international initiatives. BVD is a notifiable disease in 9 European countries. This is not currently the case for England or any country in the UK. However, other areas are making swift progress on BVD eradication. So Scotland is on phase 5 of its government-run scheme. They currently have legislation in place to restrict the movement of cattle with unknown status or positive status. As of July this year, they had under 150 PI animals alive in Scotland. Wales has the only other voluntary scheme in the UK, although they have funding from Welsh Government to deliver testing for all herds. Currently, they've tested 8,400 farms, which equates to about 75% of all Welsh holdings. The scheme is hopeful to gain further government backing in the form of legislation in the coming years. And Northern Ireland has 97.3% of their cattle with direct or indirect BVD negative status, and they also have legislated movement restrictions in place. So a bit further afield, the US cattle producers have drafted policy documents with the ultimate aim to eradicate BVD from America. New Zealand have moved BVD up their list of priorities, which they were planning to get started with, but unfortunately were hit with the Mycoplasma bovis issue, but BVD will come soon. And in Norway, no infected farm has been found and no restrictions have been imposed on any farm due to BVD since 2005, and this was followed by Sweden, who has been free of BVD since 2014. I think this demonstrates that eradication is achievable and should be sought after. So bringing it back to BVD-Free England scheme and how the scheme works and what it can cost farmers. Our scheme is voluntary and free to join, although we do have a small upload fee that we use to keep the national database up to date, to add new features, and to run our BVD-free help desk. And our current progress. So as you can see, we have over 6,000 beef and dairy herds already registered with us. These represent over 270 vet practices across the country and cover around 38% of the national breeding herd. We also have almost 750,000 individual statuses available in our database. You can see that those herds are split into 42% dairy and 58% beef, although due to dairy herds being larger on average, our breeding animals are split 60% dairy and 40% beef. When a holding joins our scheme, we have a recommended approach to eradication. We use assess, define, action, and monitor, or ADAM, and this was developed by Brownlee and Booth at RVC. So assess. During this stage, we ask farmers to think about the impact BVD could have on their holding, what their current risk of bringing BVD onto farm is, and to narrow it down to those main risks are, and then they'll use this to inform their decisions for the coming steps. So on to define. They would move on to defining their BVD status. This can be via herd or individual testing. Depending on the outcome the farmer desires. So if they are just moving on to sell, they may choose just to do individual animals. If they're trying to gain herd status, the scheme requires the holding to conduct herd testing to then go on to achieve BVD-free negative herd status. So option number 1 is the antigen testing in the form of blood or tag and test for each calf born for a minimum of 2 years. This tends to be popular in dairy herds that calve all year round and those with smaller herd sizes due to the cost implication. So it costs about £5 to include the tag, test and the upload. And the second option is young stock check testing. This consists of blood testing a minimum of 5 unvaccinated animals between 9 and 18 months of age for antibody. And this is per management group and on an annual basis. So this is the slightly cheaper version for people with larger herds. So they might choose to go down this route. Okay, and then on to action. This will depend on the results of the testing. So either everything came back negative and the holding can focus on planning to keep BVD out, or if a problem was identified, then a PI hunt will be needed. That process is very tailored depending on the circumstances and usually done very closely with their vet. So it would very much depend on the route that they wish to take. It could involve lots of pooled sampling, or if the herd is small enough, do an individual test on every animal. And then finally, monitoring. So that would consist of continued testing to keep the status up to date, and the continued implementation of tweaking of the action plan to keep BVD out of their herd. Once the holding is registered with us and starts testing via our approved laboratories, their test results will be available on our central database. Using the website homepage, anybody with a CPH number or animal identification number can look up the animal or herd status. And I'll just quickly take you through what the statuses are. So for the individual, they can be negative. They can be presumed negative, so a dam would be presumed negative if the calf tested negative. They can be positive, or they can be unknown. So that'd be due to either not having an individual test or not being part of the scheme. When it comes to herd status, they could appear checks accredited, so that's when they've achieved negative with one of the checks health schemes. We can easily transfer that data over from those health schemes so that that accreditation can appear on our website. From completing their 2 annual or 2 consecutive years worth of negative testing, they could appear BVD-free negative, or they could be not negative. That could be because they have positives, or they may not have completed all of their testing yet. So that covers how we work. Moving on to future priorities. In the next few years, the scheme is hoping to reach 50% of breeding cattle covered in England, and I'll come back to stamp it out in a second. We want to secure the support from beef red tractor standards to make it a mandatory standard. At the minute, there are discussions being had, but we're hopeful that that will come about in the new reiteration. And for the dairy standards, it's already been made a mandatory that farms have to have some sort of BVD control from October 2019. We are also looking to work with new initiatives such as the Animal Health Pathway to support the engagement of further holdings across England. And most importantly, the board hope to gain enough industry and farmer support to go to government to request supporting legislation. And this is essential if full eradication was to be achieved. So I said I'd come back to stamp it out. I just wanted to touch on this scheme. So this is an RDP funded scheme being managed by SAC Consulting. It funds vets to create cluster groups of farmers to discuss and then test each individual farm for BVD. And there's also then further money available if that farm tested positive for PI hunts. Originally, its delivery was scheduled to end in December 2020. However, due to the events of this year, this has now been extended to June 2021. They have currently fully allocated their money, but they do still have a lot of delivery to go. And the write-up of that work will be available in early 2022. And the reason that that's important is that the holdings registered under the Stamp It Out scheme can automatically enrol with BVD-free England at the same time. So that sort of helps us get towards our goals. So as you can see, there's further resources and information available if you're interested. These links are also in the information pack I mentioned earlier. And that takes me to the end. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Lorna. If anyone obviously has any questions on BVD free, if you can type them into the question panel now. We have already got a question that's come in, Lorna. How often would a beef finisher that buys in stores from BVD negative herds have to test as they have lots of movements going in and out?
So we would work on the biosecurity principle of doing isolation, so they could keep their status, but just test either before they come on farm or before they then mix with the rest of the animals on farm.
Okay, has anybody else got any questions on BVD? Do we know if any of the colleges have taken part and joined up with BVD free, Lorna?
At the moment, we do have 2 colleges and a couple of universities. So Liverpool's with us, Nottingham's with us at the minute. So yeah, people are engaged, and I have done a few talks at different colleges and universities in the last couple of years.
it looks like there aren't any more questions, unless anyone's got one. If you type it in quickly, and then looks like you've got away lightly this afternoon, Lorna, with questions. Yeah, no, there doesn't seem to be any other questions coming in about BVD-free. So thank you very much, Lorna, and hopefully the lecturers obviously will take those messages back and get those points out to the farmers of the future, so that they can obviously realise the importance of BVD and how the impact that has on farms, both beef and dairy farms. So hopefully those messages will get taken back to the next generation. So thank you very much, everybody, this afternoon. Thank you again to Ben, Kathryn and Lorna for their great presentations and discussions. And thank you to all of you guys for listening. Without you, obviously, we wouldn't have any presentations to give. So thank you for giving up your time. Sorry, obviously, it's a webinar, not getting you all in person, because I know that you like the interaction and having time to chat with other lecturers from across the country. But obviously, we are where we are, so we can't do a lot about that. Just a reminder, there is still time to register if you'd like to listen to the Arable Lecturers webinar in the morning. And then the business one tomorrow afternoon. There is still time to register for those. So if you go to the website, you'll find the links to register for those. That you will get a feedback form pop up when we finish the webinar this afternoon. If you could possibly spare a few minutes to fill that in, that would be great, because your help and feedback really helps us mould what we do moving forward. So and if you don't have time to do that straight away, I think we will send you an email with the link to that. So if you could do that in the next couple of days, that'd be great. And just a reminder that this afternoon has been recorded. So if you did need to go back and recap on anything that we've gone through, then that will be available on the AHDB webinar page and YouTube shortly. So thanks again, everybody, and thank you for listening, and hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much.